Hello and welcome to another episode of the Racing Writers Podcast, episode 49. To all those who are returning listeners, welcome back. And to all those who may just be discovering us, welcome. And I hope you will go and enjoy the archives. We've got a lot here on the Racing Writers Podcast. Like I said, episode 49. It's pretty cool. So today's episode is one that I have been waiting to air kind of the right time, and Daniel Hamrick, of course, is making a splash in the Xfinity Series. So this conversation is with his crew chief, Danny Stockman. So Danny, of course, is guiding the ship of the number 21 Richard Childress Racing Team, and he's been around NASCAR for quite a while. Has worked with many recognizable names in the sport, people like Brendan Gaughan, the Dillon brothers, Ron Hornaday. But Danny has a really fascinating and fun backstory himself. He's a third-generation racer. He has worked his way up from sweeping floors to being a crew chief. And it's a fascinating story. That's what I love to do here on the podcast. So I'm really excited to air this. Some fun nuggets that I want you to listen for, and there's a lot here, but here are some of the ones that I really want you to listen for in this episode. So Danny is going to tell you about how when he was younger, he would study and quiz himself from racing textbooks. So learning about race cars, camber, chassis, all that. I got a real good kick out of that. He's also going to tell you about how he had a certain milestone that he wanted to hit of when he wanted to be a crew chief. He had a certain age. He wanted to be 27 and be a crew chief. And spoiler alert, he did. And another thing in here that I found really interesting was his brutal honesty when it came to Richard Childress Racing, particularly the Cup Series side, the Cup teams. And Danny will tell you that he wants to be a part of having Richard Childress Racing essentially be relevant in the Cup Series, have the media talk about them again. He used some really blunt terms that I'm going to wait for you to listen to hear for yourself about their performance and how they need to turn things around. So those are some of the fun things. And one of the other things that's kind of the whole or a strong point of this podcast, I guess you could say, is Danny talking about his current driver, Daniel Hamrick, who's going to the Cup Series next year. But this is their second year working together in the Xfinity Series, and you're going to hear Danny talk about how intelligent and involved Daniel is with his race team. For those who don't know a lot about Daniel, he has grown up a racer, obviously, but he's a very hands-on racer. He's had to work on a lot of his own stuff. He knows his way around a race car, and that kind of translates to a very high racing IQ, and it's very interesting to hear a crew chief talk about that in their driver and kind of how that makes for an interesting dynamic within a race team. So really, really fun episode, very insightful from Danny Stockman. He was a lot of fun to talk to. We had a great time at Richard Childress Racing doing this chat, doing this podcast. So I'm glad it's time to air it. Of course, if you have any feedback and if you want to tell me what you enjoyed about the podcast, please do. You can find me on Twitter at Kelly Crandall. I was really happy that there was a lot of feedback and a lot of really cool things to say but from you guys after last week's episode with Sheldon Creed. He's another one that has such a great racing background, and it was a lot of fun to get to know him. And GMS just announced that Sheldon will be full-time with them next year in the Truck Series, so that's awesome. Very timely there. So please go back to the archives and listen to that episode because you're going to hear his name a lot next year. This time next week, we will have 3 brand new NASCAR champions, and I'm very excited about that. I'm sure everybody is. And I bring that up because as we go into next week's episode, my plan, and we all know on this podcast things can change, but my plan is to hopefully have a reaction episode after Homestead weekend to serve as next week's podcast. So that's the plan, to hopefully have some reaction to Ford Championship weekend. Very excited to get down there. Homestead's a wonderful track. It puts out great racing, and I'm sure it's going to be another great weekend. Before I get too long-winded here, which I'm sure I already am, let me wrap it up there. Let's get to the episode. Thanks again to Richard Childress Racing, Kayla Darrow, everybody over there who made this possible. And for putting Danny and I together in the same room so we can get this done. So, fun episode. I hope you enjoy it. Here is episode 49 of the Racing Writers Podcast with Danny Stockman. All right, thank you, Danny, for welcoming me into your office on a Tuesday. What's a Tuesday like around the shop after a race weekend?
Tuesday's actually pretty quiet. Tuesday's kind of where I get to really dig into the next week or the upcoming week. Mondays are very, very busy trying to debrief from the past weekend in the mornings, and along with making sure all the parts and pieces, components, and everything are right on the primary car for the next weekend. And then, obviously get with the people and the upcoming thrash that's coming. Just make sure that we have everything in line and everything. I would say that's more of a later day Monday than Tuesday morning is just definitely, it's kind of my time to really dig into what I want to achieve as far as the issues we're going to fight for the following weekend, some of the, making sure we got enough brake cooling, making sure we have all the little details finalized. So in the afternoon, I can make sure that the guys know exactly what we need, and they're just head down digging.
So if Tuesday's more of look-ahead day, I would assume that Monday is your last kind of look back at the weekend that was type thing before moving on? And
exactly.
The rest of the week is
exactly.
What's ahead.
Tomorrow might be working on some of the next week a little bit, but today is solely really this weekend that's coming up, I would say.
So not a whole lot of looking back. It's all about going forward.
Exactly, which I don't really like to look back. We have to from a company standpoint so that when we go back to that racetrack again, to make sure that we don't miss any details. But it's mainly Tuesdays are just focused on what's ahead.
Yeah. So I want to give you a chance again to kind of tell your story and background because, again, the little bit that I know of it seems really, really fascinating. But I want to touch on 21 team stuff first. So I've heard Daniel Hamrick say in the past that he knew you were his guy. I'm curious, did you two have a previous relationship or know each other in any way before you started crew chiefing for him?
So basically, no. We knew each other. Austin and Ty and Mike and Tina Dillon had Daniel around as a child, early teen growing up, hanging out with them at their house, going on vacations, go-kart racing, bandolero racing, all that stuff. And I always knew of Daniel Hamrick. So when I came to work at RCR in 2010 to be Austin's crew chief, Austin always had a lot of respect and always bragged about how good Daniel Hamrick was. And I always knew that one day that Austin wanted Daniel to be at RCR. He always says if he ever made it to the big leagues, that he would do whatever he had to do to help Daniel make it to the next step. And it's pretty funny to see that it's all coming full circle and pretty awesome, really. So me working with Austin gave me that connection to Daniel. He would be around. I didn't really know him. I knew him just from Austin.
It was more of know of him than know him. Hi, Daniel, all that stuff. And then I remember when I was on the 27 Cup team there in 2016 for the last half of the season, I started hearing rumblings of Daniel coming here. It got me really excited. I like working with the young guys, and I knew that opportunity might be available. Mike Dillon approached me and asked me if I wanted to work with Daniel, and I was like really excited about it. Heck yeah. And I think Daniel felt the same about me, and it's just been it's been good. It's been a really fun year. 2018 has definitely been very fun. 2017, with a rookie, their first year, you have high expectations, and you really feel like you should be doing better than you are. But when you look back, it was actually okay. Our performance was okay. So, and this year, 2018, has definitely been awesome. We definitely wish we would have 5 or 6 or even 8 wins by now. I feel like we've had really fast cars and we've been in contention every week, and we're not missing a beat. We just haven't took the checkered flag yet, but we're there, and them guys know they gotta race us to beat us, and it's fun. And Daniel's doing a really good job, and we just got to keep this team motivated and
keep doing what we're doing to get to Homestead.
So everything that you heard from Austin along the way and everybody else about Daniel, has it matched up with what you have now seen from him as a driver working with him in terms of his talent and maybe what he can bring to a race team, feedback, stuff like that?
Yeah, most definitely. Daniel is not just a driver. He's actually very smart with the car side of things, and he has very good feel of the car. He works. It's like people ask me questions about him all the time, and the best thing that I can, or the best way I can explain it is, you have some drivers that they show up, they just get in the car, they show up 5 minutes before practice, they get in the car, they go do their deal.
Just drive.
Daniel is here. He's working on everything globally, right? Like now that he's got a cup ride, he's going to be working on that too. He's going to be putting himself in situations to make sure that they're going to get the most out of that situation. And he's helping me, my engineer, my team make the right decisions. It's just not me and my engineer. He's involved. He's involved in what we got going on. He's involved in the decisions that I'm making.
And his racing IQ seems very, very high.
Exactly, and that's where you can actually utilize him because his racing IQ is high. Where some guys just don't really have a clue, he does, and it makes it fun. It makes it easier when you have more brains and more smarts on board to make decisions. I just feel like it's just better.
So you mentioned 2018, of course, wanting more wins, but it has been a very decent year, again, contending for the championship. When I looked at the numbers this year are already 4 or 5 times, not times, but better than the overall numbers from 2017. So the team as a whole, you, Daniel, everybody on this group, what's been the difference? Has it been just experience, or how has the progression gone to get to where it's been? Of course, you want it, of course, to be better the next year, but what's been that growth like?
I think it's definitely a little bit of everything. We made our cars better this winter. We had we made some bad decisions as a company over the last few years. I feel like we built better cars. We put a better team together. I got my longtime engineer back that I had with Andrew Dickinson, and Daniel for sure knows what he wants more than he did last year being a rookie. And we're just as a team, we're racing smart. We're not doing anything dumb. We're making small strides in setup packages and the way we're building our cars and taking them to the racetrack, and we're not making dumb decisions. And I feel like that's really allowing us to perform up front every week, and we don't have any hiccups. We're always there. We're always where we need to be. So I think it's just a little bit of everything.
So if my research is correct, I want to jump to you personally now. You grew up racing as well. I believe it was, late models out on the West Coast?
Yes.
So kind of just take me back a little bit to kind of how you got your start just in racing in general. And again, I believe you even raced against Brendan.
Yes.
Gone, if that's right.
Yep. So I'm third generation.
Oh, I see. I didn't know that.
My
That's awesome.
grandfather was a very well-known and midget and sprint car racer in the 50s, and he drove for Vic Edelbrock. He was in the Indy 500 in 1950-something. And that's kind of where it all started. My dad started racing at a very young age of 16. Big cars, raced go-karts before that. And then same with me. I started racing go-karts and quarter midgets at the age of 5, really taking it on at 7 till I was about 16. And then at 16, I got a super late model and decided that we were going to try that route and see if we could do anything. And I remember Irwindale Speedway, the inaugural night, I believe it was either 2000 or 1999, one of those years. Brendan ran number 20, and I ran number 20. Well, I already had the number purchased at Irwindale Speedway. That was my number, 20. Well, Brendan wanted to make a deal with my dad where he wanted to run number 20, and my dad told him no. That was my number. So he had to run number 120, and that story comes up all the time when he sees my dad and everything. It's pretty funny. But Brendan actually won the very first inaugural night at Irwindale Speedway. So that's kind of how my first rumblings of knowing of Brendan gone. And then later on in the years, I decided that driving wasn't really what I wanted to do anymore. Just the money side of things and how expensive and everything it was. I decided to go to work on a race team, and I gave Shane Wilson, which was Brendan's crew chief, a resume at Phoenix. And I started working at Brendan Gaughan's race team in 2002 at like November, I think. And I worked there for 4 or 5 years under Shane Wilson, and then he left and went to Penske and all that stuff. And I started at the bottom. They made me work a 2-week trial period. I was young, to make sure that I was capable of doing the job. And after 4 days, they hired me. And Shane Wilson, I still give him crap today about he barely paid me enough to be able to get an apartment and survive in Las Vegas. It's not cheap. And I remember he said, I can pay you this much per week. And I said, I can't make that work, Shane. I need this. He said, okay. Well, he gave me that, and I worked there, and I worked my guts out and, sweeping the floors, and they'd barely let me build crush panels in the trucks or the Winston West cars. And it was really a stepping stone for me. I say I started at the bottom at Orleans Racing, but I built my own race cars before I went to work there. So when you come into a race team like that, they're not going to just let you do whatever you want. Yeah. They're going to make you work from the bottom, and that's what they did. And
the tales of people saying I swept floors is actually true.
It is. It is actually true. They're just not going to let you come in there and put the car together. Yeah. They're going to make you.
You have to start somewhere.
Exactly. And I did that, and by the time I left and decided I wanted to come to North Carolina, I was the car chief or the truck chief there at Orleans Racing in Vegas, and I left there and decided I wanted to come to North Carolina. And Rick Corelli, a childhood hero of mine, racing on the West Coast. Rick Corelli, the High Plains drifter, was one of the baddest race car drivers on the West Coast, and watched him race as a kid. Called me and wanted me to come to work for Kevin Harvick. I did that and worked there for a few years, won a lot of races with Ron Hornaday as a car chief, truck chief, under Rick Wren, who taught me a lot on how to be a crew chief and what it took and how to prepare yourself. And those were fun. Yes, I love Rick Wren to death. We won a lot of races with Hornaday, and we had a lot of good times. And this is where I'm at now.
So going back to you making the decision that driving just wasn't going to work out, it was more of, hey, I have to be realistic about this, and I can go work on the cars instead of trying to spend all my money and run out of money or whatever it was to try to be a driver myself.
Right. Yeah. I remember my mom and dad, like, ever since I was 7 years old, it was like, man, we're racing. You're going to be the next Jeff Gordon, right? And that's what we worked at as a family. Like we would go on lake trips or river trips and stuff like that, but we were racing all the time. And that's right. Like, I didn't have very many summers. My dad would make me work at the shop, and I'd go home and work on my race car or my go-kart, and we raced. That's what we did. It just got to the point to where, for me to make it to the next level, like, we just didn't have the funding that it was going to take to do that. And I just told myself, like, I don't think I want to do this. Mm-hmm. Like, it's not realistic. I want to be a crew chief. And I told myself, and there's other people that I guess I told because they remind me of it today. By the time I'm 27, I'm going to be a crew chief in trucks, Xfinity, or Cup. I worked my butt off. I worked a lot of hours. I would be the first one to show up at the shop. I'd be the last one to leave. And I wanted people to know that I was serious about what I was doing. And by the time I was 26, Mike Dillon called me at the end of 2009 truck season, and he wanted me to be Austin Dillon's crew chief. And it was like, wow.
So you hit your milestone.
Yeah, I hit my goal, and it was fairly quick. Like, I started working at Orleans Racing in 2000, at the end of 2002, sweeping the floors. Like I said, I did know how to work on race cars. I knew setup stuff, but by the time it was 2010, they're calling me to be Austin's crew chief. So pretty short period of time. Another cool story that people know about that I tell, like as a child, a teenager, maybe 10 to 13 years old, most kids were, I don't know what we were doing back then, maybe playing Pogs or something. I would lay in bed at night and read Steve Smith Autosport magazines and books on race car dynamics. And if you go back in the day, you'd go in the Circle Track magazine, and you look in the very back of the Circle Track magazine, and there was books on there about roll center, caster, camber, what the Panhard bar does in the back, what this does, what that does. And I would have my mom order me these books, and I would study these books as a young kid, literally study them. And I would lay there and quiz myself in bed, like, so the track bar, if I raise it, it does this. And then the next night, I might think about that, and then if I was like, oh, I forget what that was, I'd pull that book out and look at it. Yep, it does this. And that's where it all started for, like, setups and chassis side of things. A lot of times, these days, it's kids go to college to be an engineer, and they learn mechanical engineering and all that stuff. Well, that was how I learned how to do it. And my dad was very chassis smart, and he built his own race cars for a living. He had his own chassis shop for years, and he was very, very smart. But I think that's a pretty cool story. Yeah,
so I hear that, and I have to ask, though, if you were spending time doing that, what were you like in school then? Were you distracted, or?
I was distracted.
It was all about racing.
It was, yeah, it was really bad. I did really good in school. I got good grades because my mom and dad told me if I got below a B, I was not racing.
Okay, so you still had the incentive that you had to.
I had to make A's and B's.
Yeah.
If I made a C, I wasn't racing.
Yeah.
So I made A's and B's, but it was difficult. Like, I struggled in school because it's the same way today. If I'm not interested in something, I'm not going to put any effort into it.
Yeah.
And like this stuff, this racing, this lifestyle that I've chosen is what I'm interested in. Still to this day, I come to work on Monday morning excited to be here. I'm interested in it. I'm all in. It's almost overwhelming. I'm 37 years old now, and I look back and it's like, man, I think I want a child. My wife just turned 37 yesterday. I think we need to probably start working on children and headed in that direction. But it's like my whole life, all I've worked for is trying to get to the top level of this sport, and my wife's been supportive of me the whole time and had my back the whole time. And it's like you wake up one day and you're 37, and it's like, whoa, I guess, if we're going to have children, we need to be thinking about that. So that's weighing on me a little bit. I've been thinking about that, and it's been a good ride. Yes, exactly. It's this sport is just, it will, if you let it will chew you up and spit you out. Mm-hmm. But you got to enjoy. It goes by so quick. I mean, just yesterday it feels like we were at Daytona, and it's already October 2nd, and we're getting ready to. We got like 5 or 6 races left, but it's been a fun ride. I have no regrets.
Yeah, and the sport's been good to you. You mentioned, so you get to the Truck Series with Austin, you win a truck title. You've spent most of your time now in the Xfinity Series, have an Xfinity title. Has the Xfinity Series just kind of suited you better, or has it been one of those things where you're not in a rush to take that next step?
It's suited me. I like racing every week. The Truck Series, I feel like you kind of get stagnant. You race maybe once a month, or you might have a 5-week stretch, and then you got like 4 weeks off. You can't get in a rhythm that way. And I'm telling you, like Xfinity racing and Cup racing, you have to be on it week in and week out, and it's a lifestyle, and I like that. So I like the Xfinity Series. My ultimate goal is to be there on Sundays. We'll just have to see.
Yeah. So talking about the Xfinity Series, you've worked with the younger guys, which you mentioned you like, but what's the difference between working with the grandsons of your team owner versus somebody like a Paul Menard or now a Daniel Hamrick?
Or a Ron Hornaday.
Yeah.
So I was fortunate enough to get 3 championships. I think it was 2 or 3 championships with Hornaday as the truck chief, and then we won a championship with Scott Lynch and Winston West, and then obviously Austin. I would say that working with Austin and Ty is definitely difficult because of the blood.
Right.
Okay. I wouldn't say difficult. I would say you got to know how to deal with it. Okay. No matter what you do, everybody knows that. Like Austin and Ty are the grandson of Richard Childress. You have more pressure on you to perform, especially when Austin was first year in trucks. We didn't know. Nobody really knew if he was going to be any good, right? If he was going to be just mediocre. Well, we got racing in 2010, and he's like sitting on poles, and we're leading laps, and it was just like, wow, this kid's really good. I've had, in my racing career, working with Austin Dillon has been so much fun because me and him were like brothers. When he started in 2010 with me, he was like just a little kid. I mean, the kid barely he didn't even have any facial hair or nothing. Like, I feel like I taught him like how to be a teenager and then be a young adult. And
it's funny you say that
fun.
Because as I was researching and looking through things, of course, pictures of you and the drivers pop up, you look at pictures of how young Austin Dillon was. Like the baby face, no facial hair, he just looks 8. Exactly. To be honest with you.
And then I had fun with that because he didn't know anything about it. I mean, he knew more than most 18-year-olds or whatever, however old he was, 16 maybe. Because he's born in the business, but he didn't know the race car savvy side of things like Hamrick does. Hamrick knows it because he's had to do it himself. Mm-hmm. So teaching him all that stuff was fun. Working with Ron Hornaday, a legend, one of my biggest heroes in my entire life. Love the guy to death. He just knew what he wanted. He told you this is the way it's going to be. That's how it's going to be. You get it close, I'll wheel it from there. And that's what it was. Yeah. There wasn't no talking about it. You give him the feel he wants, he goes and wins the race. That was fun. But I had a lot of fun working with Austin and teaching him. And I listen to him on Sundays now, and you listen to some of the lingo that comes out of his mouth and how he explains something. That's how me and him, that's how we...
You can tell it's stuck.
It's stuck. And that's how he talks still to this day.
Right.
And then, Hamrick, he's a rookie, but he's not. He's had to do this his whole life the harder way.
Yeah, it's a different kind of experience between the two.
Right. Hamrick's very smart. He knows. I can talk to him very technically, and he understands. Where Austin, he knows some of that now, but back then he didn't.
Right. All right, so a few more things for you, Danny, and I'll let you get back to work. I appreciate you doing this.
Yeah, again. No problem. It's fun.
So I guess this would kind of be a little bit of a repetitive question, you having already talked about your past and being a driver and whatnot, but how much of that helps you in your current role of maybe just knowing a driver's mindset or how to attack a race car, stuff like that?
Yeah, definitely. If you talk to people that are around me a lot, I have meetings with my guys talking about how mental this is. Not necessarily just life in general, right? Like everything we do is so mental, and we can get inside of our own heads and kind of spin ourselves out, I feel like, pretty easily. And that's one thing that I preach to these younger guys is how mental this is. Coming from racing and driving cars myself and knowing that I can get in my own head. I mean, I drove from a very young child till I was a teenager, and I think that's one of the things that I try to preach to these younger guys and the guys moving up is how mental it is. Even the team guys, like these guys that when they walk in the gate at the racetrack, I want them confident that they've built the best race car in the garage area. The driver, when he sits in that seat, I want him confident that he's sitting in the best race car, the prettiest race car, the best well-prepared race car he possibly can. That comes from me preparing my own race cars and preparing my own go-karts and preparing all my own stuff, that if I did not feel when I got to the racetrack that my stuff was prepared as best as it possibly could be, or I didn't have the best equipment possible, I didn't want to be there. So I think that's one thing that I try to preach to these guys. It's important mentally, and I feel like, me racing and doing it myself, I have a good understanding of that side of things.
Yeah, that leads perfectly into what my next question would be is there a such thing as like a crew chief personality or a type of leadership? And even here in your office, you've got Vince Lombardi picture up there. I see a Bear Bryant quote over here, and you just talked about how kind of what you try to instill in your team. So to that end, what would you say maybe is your style or personality as a crew chief in terms of leading your driver and your team?
I
guess every crew chief is different, right?
Yeah,
there's probably like all up and down pit road. There's probably different types of personalities of crew chiefs, like there is different personalities with drivers. Do you feel like you fit kind of maybe of, hey, I'm more of a laid back, teach by example type thing, or how would you describe yourself?
So I would. It's kind of hard. And when I first was a crew chief, when I first came into this side of it on the crew chief side and not the mechanic car chief side of things, I had a lot to learn. A lot. I thought I had it licked, but I did not. And I'll tell you, when I first started, I was pretty rough on my people, and I micromanaged a lot. I didn't let people do their jobs. I kind of snapped at people. And I'll tell you, over the years, I have learned that your people are your most important asset that you have. We have tools, right? Well, your people are your most important tool. Just like a wrench. You need this wrench to go tighten that bolt. Well, you need these people on top of their game to make sure that whole race car is put together perfect. And that, I would say, that's one thing that I learned over the years, is you got to take care of your people. This sport is so hard. You cannot just kill people and work them to death. You have to give people time with their families, time that they need to take care of personal things, so that you get the most out of them when they're at the racetrack or at the shop. And I'd say that I'm pretty laid back nowadays. I was not 5 years ago. I was really, really hardcore on people. Like, I don't know how to explain this, but I was really hardcore on thinking that no matter what, it was live or die racing. And it took, if you didn't work 15 hours a day, you weren't doing a good job. Well, that's not the case. My whole mentality of it has changed, probably since I've turned 30, actually. And it's actually been easier on me now. It's made me enjoy this a lot more. I do. I have all these quotes hanging up, and I like looking at them, because I think people come in here and pick this block up and read it every time somebody sits in that chair. There's some pretty cool stuff on there. Mm-hmm. So, I would say that I'm more laid back, and I believe in having the right people is key to success. And there's something to be said about chemistry as far as from driver to crew chief, and something to be said about crew chief to engineer, and from the team aspect.
That is,
sure.
I was staring at this block because it's actually really, really cool. I'm kind of like the same type of person. I love like being able to stare at something.
Yeah.
So I want to end kind of on what I hope will be a little bit of a high note. Success with Brendan, success with Ron, truck title with Austin, Xfinity title. You've won Indianapolis with Ty. You want to be in the Cup Series one day. Do you have any other specific bucket list goals that you can think of, or is it one day at a time?
I feel like I'm kind of in the middle of my career. Like I've won a lot of races in trucks. I've won not as many races as I'd like to have in Xfinity. I've won a championship in Xfinity and trucks. The next chapter of my life is racing on Sundays, and trying to not just race on Sundays though. Like, I'm talking about like be competitive, like be there, when we show up to the racetrack. I want RCR to be like, I want the media to be talking about us again. I want to show up and them guys be like, man, RCR's really got their shit together right now, And I on Sunday, that's what I want to do. I want to go. I want to race on Sundays with whoever the driver is. I want to be competitive, and I want to win races, and hopefully I can be a guy, maybe when I'm 45, saying that I was able to win truck championship, an Xfinity championship, and a Cup championship. And I'd say if I did that, and we had a successful time in Cup, that I would be pretty happy.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier we'll see how it works out, so I won't press you on whether it's going to happen next year.
Yeah, I don't know about all that. We'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, we'll wait and see. All right. Well, Danny, thank you for welcoming me into the office. Thanks for taking the time, and I'm really glad I got to know more because it was awesome.
Heck yeah, anytime.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.